Welcome to Mr. Positive Live, your home for positive talk. We're on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok at Mr. Positive Live. Click on the bell icon to get notified when I go live or do new video. Today on Positive Talk Daily, it is Real ID. Now, as of May 7th, which is 2 weeks ago, Real ID is required to fly domestically, to go into voting booths, to also go into federal buildings. This is a good thing in some ways, but there are also going to be people that disagree with it as well. So as of about 2 weeks ago, Real ID is now pretty much enforced now. Okay, so Real ID Act will now be enforced. This means that domestic flights within the United States and a valid passport or a Real ID compliance driver's license is needed now to fly domestically here in the United States. It's now mandatory to even go into voting booths now in some states. So what is a Real ID? That is the question. A Real ID is a driver's license or non-driver ID issued by states that meets the heightened security standards by federal government, and under the Real ID Act, these standards aim to improve the reliability and security in identifying documents used for domestic travel and also voting and things like that. This should be used more easily when you're going into traveling domestically across the United States. Do I need a Real ID? If you plan to travel domestically, it doesn't matter if it's California, Oregon, any of the 50 states, you do need a Real ID now. Another form of the federal approved identification. Now, California and New York have tried to ban this law for some reason, but it's a benefit. We need the Real ID. So if you plan to fly domestically, you'll need it. You know, it's basically, some states have tried to block this law, this new rule, because they'll in California they'll let you vote without an ID, address, even if basically just need a name. You could vote with a dead person's name, basically, in California or any other democratically blue state. Now, this isn't a politics video, but states have tried to block this from going through. But it's not successful, and it's going to stay, we need Real ID. While obtaining a Real ID isn't mandatory for everyone, if you're driving from state to state, you'll be fine. It's mainly for traveling domestically. The convenience of having a Real ID eliminates the need of carrying your passport for domestic flights here in the United States. Flexible, a Real ID can also be used to enter certain federal facilities, like if you're going to vote and stuff like that. It's very important. Also to enter buildings and stuff like that, federal buildings. Though some facilities may still require additional identification and security, Real ID is incorporated with enhanced security features that prevent counterfeiting and people stealing your identification card. Now, depending on what state you live in, it's going to be different. Now, living in New York, living in California, living in the state of Maine may require different things. Now, you can apply online with different states, like Maine Department of Motor Vehicles, DMV. New York State may be similar. You can do an online application depending on your state for those who meet the specific eligibility. Now, if you're someone who does a lot of traveling, you're probably going to need a Real ID. For those who don't travel, well, you'll be just fine with your standard identification. In-person application, if you don't qualify for an online application or prefer an online in-person experience, visit your local DMV office. Be prepared to show following documents: proof of identity, so you already have an ID or driver's license, birth certificate, or U.S. passport if you don't have the birth certificate. Proof of social security number, so you will need that. You also need a W-2 form if you don't have a social security number, because it will show you the social security number on your W-2. 2 proofs of residence, so if you have a bill, bank statement, things like that, they need to be able to see that you live at that current address. And I think that's a great idea, because you get all these illegals that are here from other countries. You got states like California trying to block this Real ID crap. And it's good to see that, Republicans are standing up for the Real ID. It is good to see. Now, a lot of people are going to disagree with it, but it's needed for more documentation. In-person applications, this is the most common method. Visiting your MVC agency, prepared to show following documents like proof of identification, birth certificate, U.S. passport, proof of social security number, or like I said, the W-2 forms. Important deadlines. Now that it's May 7th, you will need to do this because states are enforcing this. Well, red states, obviously, and most Democratic states. But there are states trying to fight against the Real ID. Like I said, some states have tried to fight against the Real ID push, especially California, Oregon, Washington State, because they're defending a lot of these, immigrants that are coming from other countries. And they know once this is needed, even immigrants will need to get a Real ID. And if they don't have an actual verification of address and things like that, it makes it a lot harder for these immigrants that are here to get a Real ID. And California is trying to fight against this. Now, New Jersey's Real ID information you can go to any states like this. Most states are complying with Real ID, but just be aware, you will need a Real ID to vote. In your next election in 2028. And I think this is a great idea. The Trump administration's definitely down for it as well. I know there's a lot of people out there that don't like Trump, but Real ID is needed because we get a lot of people taking advantage of the government, and I think Real ID helps. Now, places like California or liberal states, they're the total opposite. They don't care about Real ID. They would probably do away with it if they could. A lot of residents in California are not doing it because you got actors and celebrities saying they'll move to another state, because verification law is important, you know what I mean? And it's good to have a president that is for law and borders that are, that are made for U.S. citizens to protect us, from people trying to steal our personal information, our identity, things like that. Now, even California has to go along with the law as well. There are states that are trying to fight back, though. Now, recently, the state of Maine has always tried to, go against the law in some areas. Maine has tried to fight the Real ID Act, with lawmakers expressing concerns about data privacy. While Maine initially does go with the Real ID, Mainers, especially in the Democrat Party, have been trying to fight Real ID as well. They say it limits Mainers from traveling across the world, and they shouldn't have to. They're trying to appeal the Real ID. As of last year, the state of Maine was trying to. Historically, Maine has been hesitant of Real ID and viewing it as kind of a bad measure. Federal pressure. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security has threatened to limit Maine residents from the ability of boarding flights. This is what Democrats say. By, basically they say federal pressure. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security threatened to limit Maine residents the ability to board federal and into federal buildings. This is what Democrats will tell you, but it's not true. We have a long border with Canada. We do have a lot of flights that, people come in, fly out of Bangor, Portland International Jetport, Presque Isle International. People do fly into Maine, but it's not going to hurt anybody. The recent effects of the repeal, Lori Libby, who had a bill to repeal Maine's compliance with the Real ID, aiming to restore the state's rejection of the program, according to WGME TV 13. Currently, the deadline, the federal government, by May 7th, which has already been 2 weeks now, it's now in force. Now, it doesn't mean you can't fly. It just means you do have to sign up for a Real ID to go on flights. It doesn't mean that it's constitutionally affecting you from going to vote and stuff like that. It's just it's security measure. This should be implemented anyway. We have too many people out there, con artists, scammers, stealing people's identification numbers. And now, thanks to Real ID, there's more security, and people will be safer when they're boarding flights, and they don't have to worry about their information being compromised, traveling and things like that. So hopefully, the Real ID will be fine. So we'll see what happens. Lawmakers held a public hearing on the act of repealing the Real ID identification, but, states like California, Maine, New York, democratically run states don't like the idea of a Real ID. For Mr. Positive Live, I'm Mr. Positive.